The fisherman filed a report. That is the first thing that should tell you something is wrong. Soviet fishermen do not file reports. They drink. They argue about quotas. They go back out on the water. They do not walk into a regional administrative office and ask to speak to someone official about what they saw in the nets last Tuesday. But these men did, all 7 of them, together, and the report they filed was 3 sentences long.
The fish are glowing. They glow when the radio plays. We do not want to fish here anymore.
That report is dated September 3rd, 1976. It was stamped, received, filed under miscellaneous environmental observations, and forgotten. For 4 years, it sat in a cabinet in the Pskov regional office. 4 years. Until someone in Moscow was cleaning out old files and found it, and read it, and made a phone call. I want to tell you something personal before we go further. My father was a radio engineer. He spent 30 years working on Soviet broadcast infrastructure. Towers, frequencies, transmission patterns. He retired in 1989 and never spoke about his work. Standard practice. But when he died last year, I found notebooks. Technical notes going back to 1976. And in the margins of one entry, September 1976, he had written a word and circled it 3 times. Cadmium. I didn't know what it meant. I searched for 8 months before I found this archive. Now I know what it meant, and I understand why he circled it. This is the archive of Project Cadmium, the investigation into Lake Kozhozero, Arkhangelsk Oblast, where fish began glowing in response to radio broadcast frequencies. The investigation that started as an environmental anomaly and became something that no one in the Soviet scientific apparatus was prepared for. The official summary is 11 pages, dated December 1980.
Project Cadmium, Joint Environmental and Communications Research Directorate, initiated March 1980 at Lake Kozhozero, Arkhangelsk Oblast. Investigation into reported bioluminescent phenomena in local fish population. Finding: contamination from undisclosed industrial source causing chemical reaction in fish tissue. Phenomenon localized and non-replicable. Program concluded October 1980. No further action required.
Industrial contamination. Chemical reaction. The explanation that means we don't want to explain. But there is a problem with the contamination hypothesis. The investigators tested for every known industrial contaminant, every heavy metal, every petroleum derivative, every agricultural runoff compound. The fish were clean. Cleaner, in fact, than fish from comparable lakes in the region. Whatever was causing them to glow, it was not a chemical in the water. The second problem is the phrase non-replicable. I have the full experimental data. The phenomenon replicated every single time they tried. Every time a radio broadcast was active within range of the lake, the fish glowed, without exception, without variation. The phenomenon was not non-replicable. It was non-explainable. Someone changed one word and filed it. Let me take you back to the beginning. September 1976. The 7 fishermen of the Kozhozero Collective had been working the lake for decades. Kozhozero is remote even by Russian standards. The nearest town is 40 kilometers away. The nearest radio transmitter, a regional relay station for Arkhangelsk Oblast broadcasting, sits on a hill 12 kilometers to the northeast. It had been there since 1961. The fishermen had fished around it for 15 years without incident. Then, on the evening of September 1st, 1976, they pulled in their nets and found them full of light. The fish were alive. Pike, perch, bream, the standard Kojozero catch. All of them glowing with a cold blue-white light, the color of moonlight on ice, steady and unwavering. Not flashing, not flickering, just glowing, like something inside each fish had been turned on. The lead fisherman, a man named Gennady Orlov, described it in his report.
The light came from inside them, from the flesh itself. Not the scales, not the eyes. The flesh. When we held them up, we could see the bones through the skin, like they were lanterns. We threw them back. We did not know what else to do. We came back the next morning, and the light was gone. The fish we caught were normal, but the night after that, they glowed again.
The regional office did nothing with the report for 4 years. Then, a signals researcher in Moscow named Dr. Pavel Sokolov found it while cross-referencing environmental anomaly reports with broadcast infrastructure data. He noticed the date, September 1st, 1976. He checked the broadcast schedule for the Arkhangelsk relay station. September 1st, 1976 was the first night of an extended power increase test. The relay station had been upgraded and was broadcasting at 3 times its normal output power as part of a technical assessment. The test ran for 6 days. The fisherman's report covered exactly those 6 days. Dr. Sokolov submitted a research proposal in February 1980.
Cross-referencing the Kojozero bioluminescence reports with the Arkhangelsk relay station broadcast schedule reveals a precise temporal correlation. The fish glowed on every night the station broadcast at elevated power. They did not glow on nights when power returned to normal levels. Hypothesis: specific radio frequencies at specific power levels are triggering bioluminescent response in the fish population of Lake Kojozero. Recommend immediate investigation.
The proposal was approved in 3 days. That speed is itself unusual. Research proposals in the Soviet scientific bureaucracy did not move in 3 days. Someone above Dr. Sokolov had been waiting for this. March 1980. The investigation team arrived at Lake Kojozero. 4 researchers, 2 technical engineers, 1 security officer. They set up a base camp on the eastern shore and began systematic observation. The first controlled test was conducted on March 14th. The team coordinated with the Arkhangelsk relay station to broadcast at elevated power between 2100 hours and 2300 hours. They observed from boats on the lake with underwater lighting equipment to monitor below the surface. At 21:07, 7 minutes after the broadcast began, the first glow appeared. Dr. Sokolov's field report describes the moment.
The bioluminescence initiated in the deepest section of the lake first, then spread upward and outward as fish at lower depths rose toward the surface. The light is consistent with the fisherman's description. Cold blue-white, originating from within the fish tissue, visible through the skin. At peak intensity, the entire lake surface reflected the glow from below, creating an effect like looking at the moon through shallow water. At 2300 hours, when the broadcast was terminated, the luminescence faded within 4 minutes. No residual glow detected in fish caught after termination.
The team ran the test 11 more times over 2 weeks. The result was identical every time. Broadcast on, fish glow. Broadcast off, fish stop glowing. Correlation, perfect. Delay between broadcast initiation and luminescence, onset, between 5 and 9 minutes, consistent across all tests. The lead biologist, Dr. Anya Fedorova, began tissue analysis. She extracted samples from glowing fish during active broadcast and compared them to samples taken after broadcast termination. Her preliminary report, March 28th, is the first document that uses language suggesting she understood something unusual was happening.
Tissue analysis of glowing specimens reveals no anomalous chemical composition, no bioluminescent compounds present in concentrations sufficient to explain observed light output, no luciferin, no luciferase, no known biological photoproteins. The fish are producing light through a mechanism that does not correspond to any documented bioluminescent process. When I say the fish are glowing, I mean something is making them glow that is not inside the fish.
Not inside the fish. I keep returning to that phrase. A biologist writing a careful scientific report, and she lands on that phrase and underlines it. Not inside the fish. The broadcast is not triggering something in the fish. The broadcast is doing something to the space around the fish, or to something passing through the fish that produces light as a byproduct. Dr. Sokolov began frequency mapping. He worked with the relay station engineers to vary the broadcast frequency while maintaining constant power output. He wanted to know if specific frequencies triggered the glow, or if it was purely about power. I want to pause here for a moment, because this is the part of the archive where the investigation changes character. Up to this point, the researchers were operating within a framework they understood. Strange phenomenon. Systematic testing. Working toward an explanation. But frequency mapping is where the framework started to crack. Because the answer it produced was not an answer. It was a question wearing the shape of an answer. The results were precise and disturbing.
Frequency mapping complete. Bioluminescent response is not triggered by power output alone. The phenomenon is frequency specific. Response occurs only within a narrow frequency band of 36 meters wavelength. Adjacent frequencies at identical power produce no luminescence. The active frequency band corresponds precisely to the standard allocation for Soviet civil defense emergency broadcast. This is the frequency used for emergency alerts. It is not currently in regular broadcast use at Kozhozero.
The frequency used for emergency alerts. The frequency reserved for announcing catastrophes. That frequency, at that specific wavelength, made the fish glow. I have spent 3 days sitting with that fact. The Soviet emergency broadcast frequency is not arbitrary. It was chosen after careful analysis. It travels well through interference. It penetrates buildings. It reaches people in basements and shelters. It was designed to carry the worst news possible to the widest possible audience. The people who chose it thought about what frequency you would use when everything else had failed, when normal communication had broken down, when what you needed to say was so urgent that every other consideration was secondary. And something else had chosen the same frequency, or had been using it first. And the fish knew. Dr. Fedorova submitted a secondary analysis in April. She had been testing something else, something Dr. Sokolov had not asked her to test.
At the request of no one, I conducted the following experiment. I placed live fish in a sealed tank inside our base camp facility, isolated from the lake environment. I then exposed the tank to a localized broadcast at the active frequency using a low-power field generator. The fish in the sealed tank glowed with identical luminescence to the lake population. This confirms the phenomenon is not mediated by water chemistry or environmental factors specific to the lake. It is a direct tissue response to the frequency itself.
Then she added a note, handwritten, in the margin of the typed report.
I also exposed myself to the field generator at the active frequency for 30 seconds. I want to document this in case it becomes relevant later. I did not glow, but for approximately 6 hours afterward, I was able to hear the emergency broadcast frequency as a tone, faint, constant, like tinnitus, but with a specific pitch. It faded by the next morning. I do not know what this means. I'm noting it because I believe in complete documentation.
This is the point where I thought I understood what Project Cadmium was. A radio frequency that triggered bioluminescence in freshwater fish. Strange, certainly. Worth investigating. But contained. Local. A phenomenon with an eventual explanation somewhere in the physics of electromagnetic radiation and biological tissue. An anomaly that would eventually resolve into a paper in a journal no one read. Something to describe at dinner to people who would nod politely and change the subject. I have been wrong about the shape of stories before. I should have learned by now. I was wrong. The phenomenon was not contained. It was not local. I was wrong about what the fish were showing them. And I was wrong about who had put the signal there in the first place. May 1980. Dr. Sokolov submitted a progress report to the Oversight Committee in Moscow. The report was thorough, detailed, scientifically careful. It presented the frequency correlation, the tissue analysis, the isolation tank results. It concluded with a recommendation for expanded study. The response came back in 48 hours. A single paragraph.
Project Cadmium findings noted. Investigation is to be expanded immediately. Additional personnel and equipment en route. Dr. Sokolov is to cease all public documentation of findings pending security review. All existing reports are reclassified. Oversight transferred to Special Technical Directorate.
Special Technical Directorate. Not an environmental agency. Not a scientific research body. The division that handled classified technology programs. The division that handled things the Soviet state considered strategically sensitive. Dr. Sokolov's personal diary, which I found in the secondary archive and which he clearly never expected anyone to read, contains his reaction.
They knew. Before I sent my report, they already knew what I was going to find. The response was too fast. 48 hours to reclassify everything and transfer oversight. They had a response prepared. They were waiting for someone to find the Kojo file and connect it to the broadcast schedule. They wanted this discovered. They just wanted to control who discovered it.
The additional personnel arrived in May. 8 new researchers and 4 security staff. Among them, a physicist named Dr. Konstantin Baranov, who specialized in electromagnetic wave propagation, and a man who was introduced only as a consultant from the Communications Ministry, whose name appears nowhere in the official documentation, but whose handwriting appears in the margins of Dr. Baranov's reports. I know that handwriting. I have seen it in notebooks left in a box in my father's study. June 1980. The investigation entered its second phase. Dr. Baranov brought new equipment, more sensitive instruments. Equipment designed not just to measure the broadcast frequency, but to analyze what was happening at a deeper level. He discovered something that is not in the official summary.
The active frequency is not simply triggering a response in the fish. The fish are responding to something carried within the frequency. The broadcast at 36-meter wavelength appears to carry a secondary signal embedded within the primary transmission. This secondary signal is not present in standard test broadcasts at the same frequency. It appears only when the frequency is broadcast from the Arkhangelsk relay station specifically. The signal is narrow band, low amplitude, and would be undetectable by standard monitoring equipment. It has been there since at least September 1976, possibly longer.
A hidden signal inside the emergency broadcast frequency, coming specifically from the Arkhangelsk relay station. A signal so subtle it had been invisible for 15 years, and the fish could hear it. Dr. Fedorova ran new tissue analysis with this information.
If the fish are responding to a secondary embedded signal rather than the primary broadcast frequency, this reframes the phenomenon entirely. The fish are not simply reacting to electromagnetic radiation. They are detecting something specific within that radiation, something encoded within it. The bioluminescent response may not be a reaction. It may be a response, an answer. The fish may be receiving a signal and responding with light.
The fish may be receiving a signal and responding with light. Dr. Baranov spent 3 weeks attempting to decode the secondary signal. His notes from this period are partially redacted, but what remains is legible enough.
The secondary signal has structure. It is not noise or interference artifact. It has pattern, rhythm, repetition. I cannot yet determine if the pattern carries semantic content, but it has the characteristics of intentional transmission. Someone is using the emergency broadcast frequency as a carrier wave for a secondary transmission. Someone has been doing this since at least 1976. The question is who? The relay station engineers deny all knowledge. I believe them. This signal is not being generated at the relay station. The relay station is simply broadcasting it. The signal originates from somewhere else, and it is being received by the fish.
The security officer assigned to the project, a man named Lieutenant Voronov, submitted a report to his superiors that cut through the scientific language entirely.
Recommend immediate answers to the following questions. 1. Who is embedding a secondary signal in the emergency broadcast frequency? 2. How long has this been occurring? 3. Why are fish the only organisms demonstrating visible response? 4. What are the fish responding to?
The answers to those questions are in the archive, but they are not in the official summary. They are in the secondary files, the buried files, the files that explain why Project Cadmium was reclassified and handed to the Special Technical Directorate. July 1980. Dr. Baranov succeeded in isolating and recording the secondary signal. He played it back through audio equipment at frequencies the human ear could process. His report on what the signal contained is the most redacted document in the archive. Entire pages are blacked out, but the conclusion is intact.
The secondary signal, when decoded and transposed into an audible range, resolves into a repeating sequence. The sequence has duration, rhythm, and what appears to be harmonic structure. It is not language. It is not code in any system I can identify. But it is organized, it is deliberate, and when played through audio equipment in the presence of the fish tank, the fish glow at maximum intensity. They do not require the radio broadcast. They require the signal itself. The radio was simply how the signal was being delivered. Someone or something has been transmitting this sequence through Soviet emergency broadcast infrastructure. And the fish have been listening.
Dr. Fedorova heard the recording. She documented her reaction. Dr. Baranov's journal continues with an entry that would prove prophetic.
Dr. Baranov played me the decoded signal this afternoon. It lasted 47 seconds. I cannot describe what it sounded like. I can only say that it sounded familiar, not in the sense that I had heard it before, in the sense that some part of my body recognized it. The way you recognize cold before you touch ice. Some deeper part of me had heard this before. I do not know what that means. I know that after Dr. Baranov turned off the recording, the tinnitus came back. The same tone I heard after exposing myself to the field generator in April. But louder this time, and this time it did not fade.
August 1980. The investigation reached a conclusion that was then systematically buried in the official summary. Dr. Sokolov's final report exists in two versions. The public version, the one that mentions industrial contamination and declares the phenomenon non-replicable. And a second version, classified at a level that required 4 authorizations to access. A version I should not have been able to reach, and which I reached at 2 a.m. through a search error I cannot replicate. The second version reads, in part,
the secondary signal embedded in the Arkhangelsk emergency broadcast frequency is not of Soviet origin. It is not of any known human origin. It was first detected in the broadcast infrastructure in 1961, the year the relay station was constructed. Backtracing analysis suggests it predates the station. The station's construction inadvertently provided a carrier wave for a signal that was already present in that frequency band. The signal has been transmitting continuously for at minimum 19 years. It is not a code awaiting decryption. Based on Dr. Baranov's harmonic analysis, it is a beacon. Something has been broadcasting a continuous signal at this frequency for at least 19 years. The fish of Lake Kozhozero, which sit within optimal reception range of the relay station, have been receiving and acknowledging this signal with bioluminescent response. They have been answering it. Every night that the station broadcast at sufficient power, the fish lit up as if to say, "We hear you. We are here.
We hear you. We are here." The fish were not malfunctioning. The fish were not contaminated. The fish had better hearing than we did. For 19 years, something had been broadcasting into the frequency band we reserved for our worst emergencies, and the fish had been writing a response in light, and no one had noticed until 7 fishermen couldn't sleep and walked into a regional office and wrote 3 sentences on a piece of paper. The official response to the second version of Dr. Sokolov's report was a single directive, dated September the 15th, 1980.
All findings relating to non-human signal origin are to be treated as classified at maximum level. Destroy secondary signal recordings. Cease transmission monitoring. File public summary as prepared. No further investigation. Lake Kojozero to be designated restricted zone pending ongoing environmental assessment.
Destroy secondary signal recordings. I checked. The recordings were not destroyed. They were moved to a different archive under a different classification. Someone saved them. The same person, I believe, who kept the secondary version of Dr. Sokolov's report. The same person whose handwriting is in the margins of Dr. Baranov's notes. The same person who circled a word 3 times in a notebook in September 1976 and kept that notebook in a box until he died. My father was a radio engineer who worked on Soviet broadcast infrastructure. He retired in 1989. He never spoke about his work. But he kept the notebooks. And he kept, in a separate envelope tucked inside the last notebook, a single sheet of paper with a waveform drawn on it in pencil. A visual representation of something he had heard. A 47-second sequence drawn as a sound wave. Clean lines, precise measurements, the handwriting of an engineer who measured things carefully. At the bottom of the page, in smaller letters, this is what they were answering. I have been sitting in this archive room with these documents for 2 weeks. I have the recording, the one that was supposed to be destroyed. It is on an audio tape in a sealed container in a box that was marked personal effects and shipped to me along with my father's notebooks. I have not played it yet. I know what Dr. Fedorova described, the familiarity, the recognition that comes from somewhere below thought, the tone that does not fade. I am not certain I want to know if she was right. But I keep thinking about the fish, about what they were doing every time that signal came through, lighting up from the inside, broadcasting their response with everything they had. 7 fishermen hauling in nets full of cold blue light and not knowing they were witnessing something that had been happening for decades. An exchange, a conversation. On one side, something transmitting a signal through the frequency reserved for our emergencies, patient, continuous, waiting. On the other side, the fish of Lake Kojozero, doing what fish do, which is live in the water and sense what passes through it. And when something passed through that they recognized, they answered. They answered with their whole bodies. I keep thinking about what it means that we reserved that specific frequency for emergencies. That of all the frequencies we could have chosen for the signal we would send when everything was falling apart, we chose the one that something else was already using. That we chose, without knowing it, the frequency that something had already decided was important. The lake was designated restricted in 1980. It is still restricted. The relay station is still operational. I checked the current broadcast schedule. The emergency frequency is still allocated, still reserved, still silent except for tests. But the fish are still in the lake, and the lake is still within range of the station. I think about what it means to be a fish in Kojozero, to live in cold, dark water and sense the world through pressure and electricity and the faint chemical traces that things leave behind. To have no concept of radio waves, of transmitters, of infrastructure built by creatures you have never seen, and yet to carry, somewhere in your tissue, some receiver tuned to a specific frequency. Some antenna built not by evolution for any survival purpose you can name, but simply there, waiting, patient as the lake itself, waiting for a signal that comes through rarely and irregularly, that lasts sometimes minutes and sometimes hours, That means nothing you can articulate, but that your whole body responds to with the only language you have. Light. Cold blue-white light from the inside out. We hear you. We are here. I find myself returning to Dr. Fedorov's phrase, not inside the fish. Whatever the signal was doing, it was not acting on the fish from within. It was acting on something that passed through the fish. Something that passes through everything, through water and concrete and bone and the dark space between atoms, and that most things cannot detect. But the fish could. Kozozero fish, in that specific lake, within that specific range of that specific transmitter. Whether by accident or design, they could hear what most of the world could not. I want to tell you something I have not written down yet, because writing it makes it a fact, and I am not certain I want it to be a fact. 3 days ago, I found the audio tape my father kept. I did not play it, but I held it, turned it over in my hands for a long time in this quiet room with the ventilation hum and the flickering light. And when I put it back in the envelope, I noticed something. A tone, faint, constant, specific pitch. I have been hearing it since. My father kept notebooks for 30 years and never spoke about his work. He circled one word in September 1976 and kept every page that came after. He saved a recording that was supposed to be destroyed. He saved the waveform he drew from memory. He left me an archive of something he could not explain and could not discard. He must have heard it too, the tone. He must have carried it for years. I wonder if he heard it every morning when he woke up and every night before he slept. I wonder if he stood at his kitchen window in the evening and listened for it underneath the sounds of the city, the traffic and the neighbors, and the television through the wall. I wonder if it got louder over time or fainter. I wonder if he ever learned to live with it, or if living with it was simply what the last 30 years of his life were. I wonder if he wanted me to find this archive, if the notebooks were not just records but directions. A path laid deliberately, each file leading to the next, ending here in this room at 2 a.m, with a tape on the desk in front of me. I wonder sometimes if that is why he kept the notebooks, not to explain what he had found, but to leave a trail for whoever came after. A path through the archive to the recording to the question underneath everything. What was the signal, and who was sending it, and why did they choose our emergency frequency, and what did they think when the fish wrote back in light? Lake Kozozero is still there. The water is cold and dark and full of pike and perch and bream. And somewhere in the deepest section, the fish go about their lives in the way fish always have, sensing what passes through the water, the pressure waves and temperature gradients and electrical fields that are the texture of their world. And if the right frequency comes through again, at the right power level, they will do what they have always done. They will light up from the inside. They will answer. They have been answering for decades, patient and precise and completely silent about what they were hearing. The way all of us are silent about the things that pass through us that we have no words for. The things we can only answer with our whole bodies, lit from the inside, glowing in the dark. The tape is in the envelope on the desk in front of me. I am going to play it. I need to know what my father spent 30 years carrying. I need to know what the fish have been answering.